Okay, so welcome everyone to the Orchard Care webinar. We're delighted to welcome Witch Hazel from the Orchard Project here, who's going to give us a presentation. Over to you, Witch Hazel, if you would like to, we'll just check it's all working.
Fantastic, thank you. There we are. Can everyone see the screen, hopefully? Can you see that all right, Lauren?
Yeah, I can see that fine.
Brilliant. Hopefully
so yeah, any problems, let us know.
Put it in the chat if you can't see the presentation. So hello everybody, welcome to this evening's presentation on caring for community orchards. Lovely to have you all with us, giving up your time. Yes, it would be great to know in the chat if you are planning to come to one of the practical sessions, because then we'll know if we're talking to people who are just coming for tonight or whether people are planning to do a practical session as well. So, plan for today's event, the PowerPoint part, I'm going to introduce you to the Orchard Project and our work. I'm going to talk you through the process of caring for a community orchard, and yeah, there will be questions and answers at the end. I'm just going to say a little bit about the work with Vale Nature Partnership. So we've been working together, getting an overview of all the existing orchards in the region, or many of them, and just where they are, mapping them out, and offering support and advice to some of the community orchards and private orchards in the form of site visits. As part of the support, we're also offering a couple of online sessions and practical sessions, which is why we're here today. The two pictures are of local orchards. So above right is Comiston Lakes, a lovely biodiverse orchard with a laid hedge on two sides and mature woodland on the other two sides, being managed by a very committed group. And below is Porthcurry Country Park, which is also managed mainly for biodiversity. That has a lovely mature woodland edge on the right, and then it has tall native hedgerows around the other sides, and has managed scrub areas. So lightly managed, very public access, and really good for biodiversity. So moving on, now I'm going to play this little clip. You won't be able to hear it, but you'll be able to read it, hopefully. You might be able to hear it. Oh, sorry, that's disappeared. Oh, let me try that again. Okay, so that's just a little introduction to the Orchard Project. We're in 5 cities around the UK. We're in Scotland, London, Wales, Manchester, 2 in Scotland, yes, and Manchester. So yeah, we're kind of UK wide. So why do we work with orchards? Well, orchards have played an important role in communities for many centuries, providing a focal point, a gathering space, and a place where people and the rest of nature successfully work together to create abundant harvests, providing fresh fruit long before the time of global freight. Along the way, many customs and traditions have developed, as have thousands of different variations on Malus domestica, our well-known apple, each cultivar with its unique flavour, texture, use and story, linking people to place and heritage. Orchards help improve people's well-being, whether they are volunteering in the orchard, walking through the orchard, or simply benefiting from its presence in their neighbourhood. Orchards provide a local sustainable food source that can be gathered and enjoyed by all, also increasing the environmental biodiversity. Orchards can contain a range of diverse habitats due to the combination of trees, fruit, lichen, long meadow grass, boundary hedges, etc. There are specific species that only live in the orchard environment. Orchard harvesting and celebrations bring people together, thus helping with community cohesion. Orchards have special qualities in every season. Here's an overview of what's going on through the year. In the spring, we've got the lovely blossom, we have pollination, we have spring bulbs, and we need to feed and water the trees. In the summer, we can enjoy the orchard and use it for rest and recreation and picnics. We need to water the trees, especially if they're young. We may do some fruit thinning and summer pruning in the summer. In the autumn, we can enjoy the apples and have an apple day on October the 21st, the traditional day for apple events. The jobs in the autumn are to harvest and enjoy the fruit and maybe have a juicing day. And in the winter, we do the main work, the main hard graft of planting, pruning and grafting as well, all done in the dormant season. Traditional orchards are a priority habitat under the UK's Biodiversity Action Plan. They're different from woodlands, for example, as the trees are spaced apart. So orchards are more similar to wood pasture, where there's a mix of trees and open meadow, a previously common rural habitat. So orchards have now become islands for species that would have thrived much further afield. The orchard habitat is more open and sunny than woodland, and therefore good for flying insects. Also, fruit trees decay early. They're what's known as early senescent. So older orchards have lots of fungi and invertebrates that live on decaying wood. The insects living in traditional orchards are a food source for birds and bats. The trees can also provide a nesting site and also fruit for the birds, mammals and invertebrates to feed on. You may find mice, hedgehogs, foxes and even badgers. Lichen, mosses and liverworts are often seen on the bark, and a number of climbers may also be seen, such as ivy, honeysuckle and old man's beard, which provide a nectar source. Also semi-parasitic mistletoe. Encouraging native bees into the orchard is particularly important as they are very efficient pollinators, rather than introducing hives of bees. We prefer to see native bees being supported. Unimproved grassland in an orchard environment, together with fruit trees, provides important habitat, and the combination of other microclimates such as hedgerow, wildflowers, scrubby areas, and maybe a pond can all result in a rich and biodiverse environment. Even individual trees, in a garden or something, can really add to the biodiversity of the garden. The two pictures we've got here are both of Wenvo playing fields, a great little community orchard. Interestingly, it's at the back of the playing field. The playing field is very wet. It's an area that wasn't suitable for anything else. And if somebody had said to me, is this a good spot for an orchard? I actually would have said no, because it's so wet. But actually, you can see that it's turned out to be a very good spot for an orchard, and the trees are doing really well there. So you can never tell, really. It's very well managed. It's a strong community group. There's a pond, which is to the back left of that top picture. There are native shrubs, there's a wildlife hedge all along the outside of the orchard, and this amazing bug hotel, which is a notice board on one side and a bug hotel on the other, which I was very taken with and was definitely worth a photo. So a great idea there. Root stocks. I'm going to say a little bit now about root stocks and fruit trees. So fruit trees are ideally chosen to suit their site and conditions. And specifically for us, it's the Welsh climate, which can be quite a damp climate. So we're looking for local varieties such as Channel Beauty, which is a Swansea variety, Brith Mawr, which is from Newport. We have Bardsey in North Wales, which is from Bardsey Island, which copes with, sea air and salt. So normally these fruit trees are grafted by the nurseries, and the rootstocks are developed over many years to provide consistent sizing and disease resistance. So you can see that there's a picture on the left of pots of young grafted trees. You may notice that the bottom part has a different colour to the top part. So the bottom part is the rootstock and the top part is a scion, which we call a piece of another tree that we've grafted on to clone it, basically. If you just plant a seed in a pot, you won't get the variety of the apple that you're eating. But if you graft from the actual tree, then you will. So all Bramley apples are cloned from the same original tree, for example. So there's different types of rootstocks for apples, and then pears and cherries and so on all have different sorts of rootstocks. So the apple rootstocks sound a bit like motorways. So they have numbers like M26, MM106 and M25, which comes from Merton and Malling research stations. So there's no magic in it really. They developed the rootstocks and they had row numbers and they just chose the best ones. So we've ended up with these rather strange figures. Very dwarfing trees for containers will be on M27 rootstocks or dwarf M9 rootstocks. These are good for small spaces, providing fruit very early in their life, having a short lifespan and needing staking throughout. And then the semi-dwarfing M26 and the slightly more resilient is slightly more resilient than the M27. With pears, they would be on a quince C for a smaller one, and for plum, they would be on a pixie for a smaller variety. For bigger orchards, for heritage orchards, we would normally grow standard trees on an M25. These are very big, very vigorous trees. They are healthier, they are long lasting, and they create good habitat for conservation orchards. They're very tall, so they're more difficult to harvest, and they need to be spaced about 7 meters apart. For a bigger tree, you'd have a pyro dwarf rootstock, and for plum, you'd be on a St. Julian A. And then in between these, we have for community orchards, the semi-vigorous, more medium-sized rootstocks, such as M116 or MM106. These are manageable height for picking and maintenance, and so they're great for community orchards because they're very accessible and people can manage them better. For pears, these would be a quince A. These would need to be spaced about 5 meters apart. The form of the tree is determined by the pruning. So we could have a bush form with a low crown coming out at a waist height, lower, or a half standard at about waist to shoulder height, or the full standard is above shoulder height. So it depends on how we prune them, where the actual crown will start. And then we can have trained forms such as cordons, espaliers and fan shapes, which take up less room. You can put them against a wall or on wires, but they do require specific pruning and training, and this is continuous. So you need somebody skilled and committed to manage them. So let's talk a little bit about a new orchard, a young orchard, and how we care for them. So what do young trees need? Firstly, protection is really important, particularly in a publicly accessible environment. So with the Orchard Project, we are often mainly focusing on urban orchards. And not everyone will appreciate the benefits of your new tree. Sometimes they will be damaged. And so we need to prevent that from the start. So if we're in a high vandalism area, we will use guards, which I'll talk about a bit later on in the presentation. If we're in a more rural environment, then we're protecting against animal damage more than people damage. And the other kind of damage that we quite often come across is enthusiastic groundworker damage. So not deliberate, but just strimming too close to the trees and so on. So we have to do protection for that as well. Secondly, we need to make sure that our trees are securely supported initially, and this is to enable the roots to establish in the ground. Thirdly, over the first few years, our trees are going to benefit from some formative pruning to give them a good shape. And weed management is really vital during the first few years. So we'll talk about using mulch to help with that. We need to water young trees regularly, especially during the first few years. This is particularly important during dry spells. So from April, May onwards, particularly May and June can be very dry. We need to be watering weekly. And then finally, we might be able to celebrate and enjoy our trees, harvest the fruit, keeping everyone involved and engaged with the orchard. Why do we have to put guards on trees? So here we are in showing in urban areas why we might need to guard. On the left, we've got dog damage, people damage, being chewed. And this is the kind of thing that can happen, people snapping off branches. I'm managing an orchard in Swansea in a park where all the trees were cut about the height you can see in that middle photo. They were all like pulled branches were pulled off, the tops were pulled off of all the trees, but they're very vigorous trees, luckily, and so they've all started to regrow. And over the last couple of years, we've been pruning them back into a good shape. So by some miracle, we've managed to save all except about 2 of the trees, which was amazing. But if we'd had proper guards on in the first place, we wouldn't have needed to do that. So here's the guards. So to ensure good protection, we use a system of 2 posts wrapped around with wire fencing, or you can buy a special mesh guard. So the ones top right that you can see, you can buy them like that, or you can use mesh fencing that you cut up. It's a lot of work to cut up the fencing, so you need someone who's up for that job. You can do quite tall height guards if you think that's necessary, and you can start high and you can lower them. You can cut them in half in a few years to allow the tree to sort of have more freedom as it grows up. We use 2 8-foot stakes and a post driver to put the stakes in, and then the tree grows up between the stakes, is supported well, and is less likely to be vulnerable to vandalism. We often put a little gap, as you can see on the left, in the guard at the bottom, so that we can put our hands in to weed out the weeds and get to the bottom of the tree. And we put an inner tube around that so that we don't cut our hands when we put them in. Here's some other types of tree protection. So in a grazed area, you might need something like the bottom left picture, where we're individually fencing off each tree. In Swansea, we've got an area in a very inner city area where horses are grazed by the local people. And so in that orchard, all the protection has got what you can see there. That's not a picture of that orchard, but that's what we've had to put in, is fencing around each tree. Spiral guards on the right hand side, little plastic guards and tree shelters. They're good where you don't need vandalism protection, but you do need animal protection, such as rabbits or hares. And you can also protect against voles. So in a grassy area, you will have voles in amongst the grass at low level. So it's very important to have some kind of guards where you've got that. Otherwise, you can find they nibble around the bottom of your tree or the bark, and then they ring bark the tree and they die, and you don't see it, so you don't know what's happened to the tree. And you can get smaller vole guards. So if you don't need a tall vole guard, you can get little ones. And you can get biodegradable ones, so that's good to use. You'll note that the ties in the picture on the right hand side, in proper ties with a spacer between the tree and the stake. They're a little bit high in that picture. It's good to remember that what you're trying to support with the stake is the roots, not the top of the tree. You're trying to support the roots to settle into the ground well. And so you really want that tie to be 1/3 of the way up the tree, so not too high. Because the top needs to be able to move so that there's a strengthening happens with the movement of the tree in the wind. So that's really important to let that happen. Yeah. If you're using a stake, it should be short. Unless you're doing the method with the wire guards, we recommend the diagonal stake, which is the picture second along in the middle. So if you're not doing a big guard, use a diagonal stake. It's much better in the wind, and it's nice and low, and so the tree won't rub on it, and that enables the rest of the tree to move freely in the wind. You'll see that there's the spacer. The bottom right picture shows you where the spacer should be so that the tree can't rub on the stake. That's very important. And if you notice that your ties and your spacers have disappeared, then it's really important to put them back properly, or remove the stake. So either have a stake with a good tie and a spacer, or don't have a stake. Don't have a stake sitting there doing nothing, because it'll just rub on the tree. As I mentioned earlier, dwarf trees will need to be permanently staked. what we do with the 2 posts method, when we've got this big wire fence, is we use inner tube. So you can wrap strips of inner tube around the tree. So the tree is held centrally in the middle. That's nice and it's inexpensive. It's free to get the inner tube from bicycle shops, and it's a way of using up a resource, that's not needed. And we use felt nails to attach that to the stakes. Again, I think that's a little bit high, that one on the left there, for my liking. And what we've got on this slide, top right, is another local orchard, Greenfield Avenue. These trees have been very well spaced out and been really planted well, and they've been given tall stakes to reduce the risk of damage by vandals. But as the trees grow, these stakes will need to be lowered so that the trees don't rub on them as they're growing up. So you can lower the stakes and then you can eventually remove them once the trees are strong enough. Adding mulch. So a final important stage when you've planted your tree is to add mulch. Mulch suppresses weeds, retains moisture, builds soil and diversity. It regulates the soil temperature, creates a more fungal soil, which is very important, and feeds the tree. So it's very important that we reduce competition from weeds and grass. So that's the main purpose of mulch. Retaining the moisture really helps. So trees of all kinds, whether they're fruit trees or other kinds of trees, if they have a good layer of mulch around them in a dry spring, they are much more likely to survive than if they don't have that, especially if your watering is a bit sporadic. The mulch kind of helps build the soil from the top down, so it will break down and it will feed the tree, and it will increase the soil food web diversity, and it also regulates the soil temperature and does this thing of helping to create a fungal soil. So when you plant an orchard in grass, you're actually putting the tree into a bacterial environment, because grass is very bacterial. But in a woodland, you'll find the soil is very fungal. So by adding wood chip mulch around fruit trees, we can help to make that soil more fungal, which is more suitable for your fruit tree. So therefore it makes it more resilient. It's very important to just clear away a little tiny bit of the mulch around the stem of the tree. So you can see in the top photograph image that there's no mulch touching the bark. That's really important. And it's good to do that at planting time, to give either just a mat and some wood chip or just the wood chip, and then it's good to top it up every year in the late winter until the tree is really, established. And you can do quite a wide circle, and you can plant into the mulch with, fruit bushes, herbs, comfrey or other ground covers. So you can just plant them straight into the mulch. So it's a great way of kind of creating a bed around your tree. Let's take a little look now at some of the insects that you might find in your orchard. The insects shown here are all beneficial in eating other pests, particularly aphids. So we should aim to attract these beneficial insects into our orchards, perhaps having one of those lovely insect hotels that we saw at the beginning. There are certain other insects that may be harmful and may affect your tree's health and leaf growth and quality. For example, aphids, sawfly and codling moth. So your trees will have a better resistance to pests and diseases if they are resilient and well looked after. The key to preventing pests and diseases is good management of the whole system, starting with the soil. So that thing of creating a fungal soil, watering well, ensuring the trees have nutrition, all those things will help to reduce risk of pest damage. And we're creating a sort of healthy environment that the trees will prefer. Watering. So when we're planting out, each tree needs a good full watering can of water. And then we should water weekly for the first few years of the orchard life, especially whenever there's a dry period. We start watering when the buds open, and we stop watering in September or October when the trees become dormant. Though there's usually a bit more rain around then, but it does depend, doesn't it, on the climate. We try and give each tree a good 20 litres per week, unless it's been raining really well. And it's much better to give one good soaking especially in the morning around the roots, than it is to give a little bit every now and then. Water butts will store a little bit of water, but when it's really dry, they will run out of water. So you need access to a tap or somebody local who's got a water source, or you can use a portable water container or a barrow container. So you'll see the guy on the left, he's got a barrow, and he's got what's called an H2Go bag, which you can fill with water, transport it to the trees, and then you tip it onto the trees. And if you're too enthusiastic, the whole thing falls out of the barrow, as I've discovered. But it's a very useful thing for carrying a significant amount of water around and doing quite a few trees in one go. So on to the subject that I'm sure most of you are here to hear about, the tree pruning. So having planted our trees, we've staked them, we've added good protection, we've mulched them, and we've set up a watering rota. We now need to look at how we're going to prune them. You'll notice that the photograph on the left is of a trained form. That's an espalier tree in the winter. So why do we prune? So firstly, we're trying to set up a strong framework of branches which supports the fruit and reduces the risk of breakage. A good framework should be formed early on. A balanced open shape to the tree will allow for light and airflow. The risk of disease is increased if the tree branches are congested. Unlike ornamental trees, fruit trees are pruned to improve the production of fruit and accessibility to the fruit. However, you do need a balance between growth and flowering, as too much fruit will mean smaller fruit. And we can also improve the tree's health by cutting out disease and dieback. So when do we prune? So apples and pears, and also figs and mulberries, can all be pruned in winter in the dormant season. This is the best time to do major pruning. We can do some additional pruning in the summer for fruit to enhance the fruit production, but any significant pruning should be done in the winter. However, there are some trees that you shouldn't prune in the winter. So any of the prunus species, the stone fruits, so this is the cherries, plums, peaches and apricots, these should not be pruned in the winter. They can be pruned in the summer. So ideally by the end of July. So I would say May, June or July, is when we should prune them. A quick look at tools. We have, a good range of tools ideally to work with fruit trees. We don't want to use anything that's blunt, so we should only use good sharp secateurs and saws. These make it much easier for you when you're working, and they also create less damage to the tree as well. I prefer to use what's known as a bypass secateur and lopper, so the blades go past each other and they do a clean cut. We use pruning saws, we use triangular bow saws because they are more accessible to get into the kind of more congested branches. And then we use pole saws. We don't work very much with ladders. We mainly work from the ground using pole saws. The one in the picture on the right, there's a pole saw there with a very big blade. That's a silky fox, which is a Japanese saw. Very, very efficient, very good, and comes up. You can work at quite a height with that. It works really well. And then we also have meths and a rag, which is for cleaning our tools. So in between each tree, we would normally clean all the tools that we've used, so we're not passing disease from tree to tree. Also, you can get a lopper attachment that you can put on a pole, which is very useful because often you need to prune, quite high up, but quite small growth. And so a saw it's just kind of too difficult to use a saw if it's very whippy. So some kind of adapter that you can put on your pole with a lopper is very useful for that kind of smaller branch. So with our pruning, where do we start? It's very important to stand back and observe the tree and the orchard to start with, and focus on the big picture, and then to home in on the detail. it's good to take a look at the surroundings. Sometimes the main work that we need to do is not on the orchard trees themselves, but on the surroundings, such as overshadowing trees, big limbs that are coming in and encroaching on our fruit trees, or maybe a hedge that's grown a bit tall and is creating shade. So it's really good to, to enable there to be plenty of airflow around the trees. They don't like to be encroached upon by hedges and mature trees next to them. They like a bit of space around them. Otherwise, they can succumb to disease and they won't produce a good crop. So we need to manage the trees around them. We might need to look at the weed growth around the trees, and it could be, low weed growth, or it could be, brambles. I've seen orchards with brambles where they're very, very neglected. The brambles are growing right over the top of the trees, and you can't even hardly see the trees. And so it's very important, to keep the brambles down and keep them out of the trees so they're not getting congested. But it's not. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a wild area in your orchard. It's very good to have wild areas, but just not where they're encroaching on the trees. Sometimes you'll find that the rootstock will send up suckers, so you get growth coming up. So you've got your main trunk, and then you've got all this other growth coming up from the bottom, which needs to be removed because that can grow up through the tree and again create more congestion. We need to look at the stakes and make sure they're good. And we need to look at the mulch and make sure whether we need to do that. So those kind of things, even with a mature tree, can be the kind of maintenance that needs to be done more importantly than the pruning even. Sometimes you get what's called a lot of water shoots. So the top picture there, you can see that there are quite a lot of small upright little branches coming up along the length of the main branches, the main laterals. So they're called water shoots, and they come up either because you've done some pruning, or sometimes they just come up. Some trees just do that quite a lot. But especially if you've been working on the tree, they'll do that. And so it's really good when you've been doing pruning work, the next summer, just go along and remove them all. You can even just rub them off when they're really young with your hand. But if they're like a year old, you can use secateurs and cut them off. It's really important not to have loads of water shoots through the tree, because if you imagine those tiny little branches when they're like 10 years old, they're causing major weight and congestion in the tree. So it's really good to deal with them as soon as you can. Sometimes we get very neglected veteran trees, but they're very beautiful as well. So this is Dunraven Walled Garden that we visited in the autumn. And there's a section of the garden that has just completely, that's an orchard at the top there with loads of other trees all grown up around it. So it's become a sort of enchanted forest. And the plan is not to disturb it too much, but to take out some of the extra growth of other trees that are really making it a very sort of congested space. And then you can see there's a mulberry at the bottom that is very, very old veteran tree, and you can see the value of that for biodiversity. It will be full of insect life basically. You could have bats nesting in there. They don't always nest high. Bats can nest quite low sometimes as well, but they love holes and flaky bits in the bark. You might find birds nesting in there, small mammals in there, and you'll certainly get birds coming in to feed, so it's just like a wonderful giant bird feeder really. So even when trees fall over and they're very, very gnarly and old, they are just wonderful as a habitat. So now we're going to talk a bit more about the specifics of pruning. So you may know that with a normal native tree, there's only one sort of bud, which is a leaf bud. Whereas with a fruit tree, you have two sorts of buds. So you have the very small vegetative or leaf buds, and then you have the more round, fatter fruit buds or flower buds. So you can see in this picture on the very left, you've got the leaf buds that are smaller, and in the middle, you've got the fruit buds developing. And then on the right hand third, you've got what are called spurs. So as the fruit buds develop, they may become little spurs, and then each year more fruit buds come off of those spurs, so you get a little spur system. And some trees will naturally do this really well, and so they have a lot, very productive. And some trees need a bit of encouragement to do this. Some trees just don't really do that. Some trees actually have more fruit on the ends of their branches, so they're what's known as tip bearers. And a bramley, for example, is a tip bearer. So you won't have lots of spur systems. It'll be mainly at the ends. which obviously has an impact for how you prune, because if you prune the ends of your branches, you will lose most of your fruit. So you have to know what you've got, really, ideally, or watch its habitat and the way it likes to grow. Discovery and Worcester pearmain are also tip bearers. So the perfect pruning cut. Ideally, when we make a cut, we cut just above the bud, we slope away from the bud, and if we're pruning on, on a fruit tree, we cut we cut so that we're enabling an outward facing bud to grow on. So we'd cut that picture on the left, say we'd want that top bud there to grow off to the right. That would be the outside of the tree, and we'd hope that the inside of the tree was like to the left. So we want that bud growing off away from the centre. So we're trying to avoid lots of congestion in the centre of the tree. And what we don't want is a stub. So on the right-hand picture, we've got a big length of wood that we've left, and then the bud is quite low down that. We don't want to do that. We want the bud right near the top. So our cut should always be just above the bud and nice and clean. Because if we leave a stub, it will just die back. It can't create a new bit of growth. It can only create the growth where the cells are around the bud or around a join. So we have to cut back to something. We can't just cut in the middle of nowhere, if that makes sense. That will cause dieback. When we have young trees arriving from the nursery, these may have already been formatively pruned and have a good shape, but sometimes they will arrive as a 2-year-old maiden and they will look like the one on the left, which is just, a single stem. And they may have no branches at all or a few down the stem. So if they haven't been formatively pruned, then it's important that we do that to create a good shape early on. So ideally, we would do what's known as a header cut during the first winter. This encourages formative growth. So we cut the top of the maiden, either at waist or shoulder height, if we've got, a medium-sized tree. And if it's not tall enough, we can let it grow on for a year. So if you get your trees and they're not above your waist or shoulder height, you can let them grow on a bit more before you do this cut. So the point we do this cut will be where the crown will start, and that will always stay at that height. So it's important we do this right. This doesn't change as the tree grows, it stays in the same place. If you've got dwarfing rootstocks, trees in pots, small trees, then you need to cut them lower because they can't support the weight of a higher crown. So looking at our photo on the left, we would choose a good bud with several buds below it. We'd make a slanting cut as shown by the dotted line. And these would all be wood buds, and they would probably look a bit flatter than actually in the photo there, in the pictures. So by doing this cut, by removing the top of the tree, we're also removing all the hormones that are preventing the branches from coming out. So basically the tree is trying to grow up further, and so it's got hormones suppressing any lower growth. So we cut off that section of tree, and then the branches can start to form. So we remove those hormones, and we're aiming for, 4 or so good structural branches, which will form the basic framework of our future tree. If you've got lower branches, then you can take a few of them off if they're small. So in the middle picture, you can see that we've made the cut and we've got no branches still, it's just buds. And then in the final picture on the right, this is what would happen hopefully in the following summer. They would now have branches forming, creating a good structure. What we'd need to do then is, you'll notice there's a little bit of a stub in the middle of the tree there where we did our cut, and you just take that off in the following summer. Remove that little stub.
Witch hazel, sorry to interrupt, just a time check, is 7:15.
Perfect. That's great, thank you. We seem to be on time. Okay, so looking at the image on the left, we can see that sometimes branches develop with different angles. So you've got a central stem, and then on the left, the branch is a bit of a narrow angle, and on the right, you've got a wider angle. What we're aiming for with our fruit trees is mainly a wider angle, so a good, strong, what we call a strong crotch, because that means that the way the branch is attached will be stronger and less likely to break, especially when there's lots of fruit, causing, increased weight on the branch. So after making our formative cut that we saw on the previous slide, the new branches that come on the tree may be a little bit of a short, their angles may be quite small. So we may encourage them to create a wider angle. The picture on the right there is showing you how to just gently bring down in the summer as they're forming, you can bring them down a little bit with a tie, something soft going round the branch, and then peg them into the ground, and that will help to bring those branches to a nice low angle. You'll find that the branches will fruit better as well if they are sort of a little bit more horizontal. If they're very, very vertical, they won't tend to fruit very well. Once you've tied them down for that first summer, you should remove those ties, and they will stay there. Then they will have become stronger, and they will stay in position. So here's an example of how you would expect a fruit tree to look if it's well pruned. So this tree has an open centre, and it's what we call a goblet shape. So it's kind of shaped like a cup or a goblet, with 4 to 5 main scaffold branches with nice wide angles. So this is the result of our initial formative pruning, where we removed that central leader and enable the main branches to develop. If we hadn't removed that central leader, then this tree would have a central branch coming up the middle, a central trunk, more like a sort of Christmas tree shape, and would be more congested in the middle. So we would normally aim for this, and a more open centre. And then as this tree is growing, initially we would remove about a third of those branches, a third of each branch, should I say, in the following winter, and that helps to create a strong structure. And you can see that that's actually happened. So you can see that each branch is divided at the ends, and that shows you that they've already had a cut made, which is causing that strong structure to be developing. And then once we've got that nice structure, we can then just carry on occasional maintenance to keep that nice open shape, and just remove things that are crossing across the middle or causing congestion in the middle. So it's really good to think about the actions that you need to carry out in your orchard, and to make an action plan. So if you've got a group managing an orchard, or if it's just your own orchard, it's really good to have a written plan that you make together with people, so that you all know what's meant to happen and what time of year you're going to carry those things out. And then if people leave the group who had more knowledge, say, then you've still got that plan to follow, or you can hand it on to somebody like a new owner of your orchard to show what you've been doing and what needs to carry on happening. So this would cover things like the bark chip, watering regularly, the formative pruning, when you've carried that out, the fact that you need to maintain the shape, and also things like loosening off the ties. So if you've got young trees with tree ties and stakes, every year you need to go around and just double check that they're not too tight, and just loosen them off a little bit as the tree is growing. Don't do them too loose. They should be doing their job, but they do need just a little bit of adjustment every year until you don't need them anymore. The first few years, you shouldn't really let your trees fruit, which is always very disappointing, but it's ideal to just let your tree focus on growing good, strong branches, and not really put its energy into fruit. So I always say the first couple of years, remove all the flowers once they've come to the end of blossom. So let them blossom, and then as they come to the end of blossom and little fruitlets start to form, take all of them off for the first 2 years, and then you're allowed 1 or 2 apples in year 3, so you get a little taste. And then after that, you can start to allow more fruit. But it's really important those first couple of years just to let the tree focus on getting its growth right. And finally, I hope that you will be able to enjoy harvesting and celebrating your trees. And I think the plan often helps. You can put some nice events into your plan, and hopefully it'll keep people engaged. A little bit about risk assessment. If you're working with a group, you do need to have a first aid kit. You're working with tools, so you need plasters and so on in case people cut themselves. If you're a community group, you should really have insurance, so you're covered for working with groups. And obviously we're working in the winter a lot when it's, you know, really bad weather quite often, so we need to make sure people are warm and cozy when they come along, they've got the right footwear on and work gloves, and that people keep warm and don't get cold and sort of find it hard to concentrate when they're working. Also, if it's a very hot day, likewise, it can be difficult to concentrate, and you might need a hat if it's very hot, and some sun cream and some water to drink. If you're in a community orchard, it's good to check for things like dog mess and broken glass and other hazards before the session starts, and to give a little safety talk about the tools so that people are confident before they start, how to carry them and not to wave them around, that sort of thing. And, you know, yeah, to check you've got your insurance in place. So thanks for listening. We're going to put some links in the chat, and they're going to be sent out to you as well, so that with some local nurseries or Welsh variety, you know, we can get Welsh varieties. There's a really good book in the link, and other things like the Orchard Project website, where you can find a lot of resources, interesting seasonal tips and events, and you can also subscribe to our Orchard news by email as well. So we're now going to have a question and answer session with Lauren helping as well. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute and see what's been happening while I've been chatting away to you.
Oh, thanks for Hazel. That's great, and yeah, lots of information to digest and lots of yeah, really useful tips and advice there. So I've just popped a couple of extra links in the chat just for your reference. So as Hazel said, a couple of sort of local and sort of Welsh heritage tree suppliers. We popped them in there, and they're ones that we have used on some of the orchards that we've recently created as well, so we can recommend them. And then I've also pop the upcoming pruning course events and webinars into the chat. As Richard said, at the end of this, we will email you with all of these, so don't worry too much if it takes a while to copy and paste them all. So thank you for sending me your questions. If anyone's got any further questions, do pop them in the chat now as we're talking. I'm just going to go over to the Q&A and we'll see what we've got. So we've got a question from Anna Smith. So last winter they pruned older apple trees which hadn't been pruned for several years. They've now noticed they're getting multiple shoots growing behind last year's pruning cut. Most are growing into the tree. Do we just cut them off?
Well, that's a really good question, and something that I probably should have mentioned in my talk actually is how much of the tree we can prune in any one year. So with younger trees, we prune between 25 and 30% of the crown as a maximum in any one year. But with older trees, we actually have to reduce that amount. So we shouldn't normally take more than about 20%. And if they're really old veteran trees, you know, like 40, 50 years old, then we would only take like 5-10% of our tree. So we do much less pruning on a really old big tree than we would on a younger tree. So what happens, as you're saying there, is that when you do that pruning, the tree responds with, you know, a kind of stressful regrowth, basically. And as we've talked a lot I've said a lot in my talk, we're trying to avoid congestion in the tree. So you would need to remove some of that regrowth. You probably shouldn't remove all of it, but yeah, things going across the middle, that would be great to remove that and try and keep the branches that are growing more outwards. But don't take off too much in any one year. So when you've got work to do on older trees, that's where your management plan comes in. You should be thinking, right, I've got quite a bit of work to do on this tree. I'll spread it out over, you know, 3 years, say. So you just do a little bit each year rather than doing it all in one go. I hope that's helpful. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I've done the classic, muted myself. Should know by now. Following on from that, we've got a question in from Rhiannon. Thanks, Rhiannon. If formative pruning hasn't been done in the first year, what should be done?
That's another great question, isn't it? Because of course, often orchards are planted or trees come and nobody has pruned them. So yeah, so it's not all is not lost. We can do that pruning later on. The reason we try and do it early is because the smaller your cuts that you can make, then the less time it takes for them to heal, the less risk of disease getting into the tree, you know, and you can just give it a good shape straight away. But if that's not been done, then we can do that formative work, you know, and we can do kind of maintenance pruning as we go on. So basically, we're still aiming for that goblet shape, and we're still aiming to sort of make the tree into the shape that we want, but we'll just have to do slightly bigger cuts normally and a little bit more work, perhaps over a couple of years, to get the tree into a good shape. So don't panic and don't do too much in one go, but just make a little plan and think about what you think the priorities are and sort of do it stage by stage, and you can get the tree back into a nice shape over time.
Excellent, thank you very much. So again, sort of, I guess, follow up from the pruning theme. So what is the difference in effect on an apple tree if you were to prune in summer or in winter? So I know we touched upon it a little bit in the presentation.
Yeah, so when we prune in the summer, we're pruning more to encourage fruit growth. So the growth that we get from that pruning is, more encouraging spur systems and fruit growth, and any wood growth would be slower growing. And then the winter pruning that we do does encourage more sort of wood regrowth, but it's also the time when the tree can recover more easily from the pruning that we're doing. So that's why we do any major work in the winter.
Excellent. So we've got couple more questions here. So we've got, could you clarify how far apart young trees should be spaced when we're planting?
So if it depends on the rootstock. So if we've got small trees on a very small rootstock, we probably allow about 4 meters between 3 or 4 meters between the trees when we're first planting them. If they're a medium rootstock, like an MM106, then we would allow about 5 meters. So that's 5 good paces between them. And if we're planting really big M25 trees for a traditional kind of orchard, then we would allow 7 meters, so 7 good paces. So really quite a lot of room between them. If we put them too close together, they will just get really congested and the canopy will kind of be closed, and you won't get that light coming in, and you won't get that sort of really nice open feel in your orchard. So it's really good if they don't touch as they get older. They look so small when you first get them, it's easy to make the mistake of putting them too close together, but it's really good to try and not do that. And if you want to underplant with shrubs, say fruiting shrubs or other things in the orchard, then allow a bit more space, so maybe another extra meter between the trees, so that you get more light coming in, so you can have other plants in there as well then.
Excellent. That's great. So we've got a question in from Leslie. So Leslie said they were told to do the smallest cut, so it would be effectively like a straight cut, not a sloping cut. So that they're just obviously just sort of seeing which you would recommend, really, because it was a bit different in terms of what we sort of said in the presentation.
Yes, we do find with as like allotment holders, orchard people all have different views of how you should do things. And I think often the slanting cut is what is taught, because the aim is that the water will run off of the cut if it's got a slant to it. But actually, quite often, your cut isn't really facing the way that the water would sit on it anyway. So that's more the case if you've got something that's really kind of vertical. But most cuts that you do, you're right, Leslie, you can just do a straight cut, because it's actually a little bit smaller when you do a straight cut, and so it'll take less time to heal. So that is fine. Yeah.
So we've got 2 more. We've got from another couple of questions from Anna. So where is the best place to buy comfrey, and when should they plant it, in terms of, as we were talking about, putting it around the tree?
Excellent. Yeah. So comfrey is really great as a food for trees, and with older orchards it's lovely to get some comfrey in there, and also with younger trees as well. It will bring in the bees and insects, which is really fantastic. You can cut it several times during the year, and you can mulch it around the tree, or you can leave them growing, and they will bring up nutrients from deep down in the soil and feed them to your trees. So it's really great to have comfrey. You can grow it from pieces of root, so if you know of some comfrey already, you can use pieces of root. I recommend that you use Bocking 14, which is a particular type of comfrey. So it's not the herbalist comfrey, which is officinalis. It's a different sort of different type, which won't grow so big. So basically, if you buy the natural original comfrey, it will spread everywhere. The roots just don't stop growing, basically, and even if you pull it all out, it will just, you'll never get rid of it. I've tried, trust me. So unless you've got
I've had similar experience.
Yeah. So unless you've got a lot of space,
Yeah.
it's better not to use that type of comfrey. So you really want the special Booking 14 comfrey. So if you go to a supplier, you can get that. You can buy it online. You should also be able to buy it from the place in Cowbridge. What are they called? The community in the communities. Oh God, I haven't prepared this. The community place in Cowbridge. The art space.
We will find it and we'll add it to our
Yes,
link
add it to
when
list,
we
please.
send it in the email.
Yeah, the art space. It'll probably come to me in a minute. Because they've got a little, they do sell some fruit trees there, and they also have comfrey, I believe.
Brilliant. And then I think I'm just checking. So we've got how old is an old tree in
That's
use?
a great question. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, with fruit trees, they're what we call early senescents. They start having kind of veteran features early on. So they're not necessarily old, but they're veteran. And this can happen, within 10 years even. But, an old tree would be 30 years plus, maybe 20 years plus even, I guess. And it also depends on your variety. So pear trees can live for a very long time. They can live for like about 200 years. So you do get these massive, really old pear trees. If they haven't been felled by somebody, you do find them. Apple trees can live for about 100 years. Mulberry trees live for a long time, as we saw in that picture. So yeah, any tree that's starting to have, holes and flaky bark and sort of interesting features, we would call a veteran fruit tree.
Excellent. That's great. So I think that's all the questions we've got. I'm just going to give it a second just in case there's any further coming through. Trying to do too many things. There we go. Yeah, so I think that's all. Just checking the Q&A. Brilliant. So yeah, thank you everyone for the great questions and for coming along and joining us this evening. I hope you found it as insightful and interesting as I have. And like I said, lots of advice and lots of top tips there to take away and work with. As we've said, we've shared some links in there, but we will send these to you via email. If you have any sort of further questions or you would like to sort of get involved in any way, then do, as Witch Hazel said, check out our websites and our social media channels for any further sort of events and opportunities that we will be holding. But I just wanted to thank you, Witch Hazel, and thank everyone for coming along, and hope to see you again soon, either at our practical courses or perhaps one of our webinars in the future. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk to you all, and I look forward to hopefully meeting some of you at the pruning day. So let me know when you come to the pruning day if you were here at the talk today.
And do as well if you have an orchard or you're planning on creating an orchard and you would like to sort of share your progress and update us on it, then again do share these either via email or on our social media channels, and we'd just love to see the work that you're sort of creating. So yeah, do keep us updated. So thanks again everybody. Have a good evening and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lauren.
Thanks
Thank you.
again.